Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the New York-Presbyterian Hudson Valley Hospital's Teaching Kitchen. My name is Chef Emily, and today we're going to be making vegan Greek cuisine. So I'm delighted that all of you are joining us, and just a few Zoom ground rules before we jump in. I just want everybody to check their microphones, have a look in the lower left corner of your screen, and make sure that it's got that line through it to indicate that you're muted. That way we can make sure we can run the program without a lot of background noise or interference. And then if you have questions, please use the chat box. And Alita, if you want to get that going, and welcome everyone. The chat box is where you can type in your questions, and our volunteer, Alita, will moderate and read us your questions as they come in. So that is going to be our Zoom ground rules. And today we're making two recipes. We're making a spanakopita, which is basically a spinach pie, Greek spinach pie. And the other thing we're making, and I'm not going to say this correctly, is fava, which is a fava bean spread. So I'm really excited to share these recipes with you, especially because spanakopita is something that is usually not vegan. Usually it has tons of feta cheese in it, and that can be a little challenging for our lactose intolerant friends. So I wanted to create this recipe using cashews and make our own sort of vegan version. And yeah, I'm really thrilled with how it came out. So I can't wait to share it with all of you. Just a little bit about what's in your packets. If you didn't get your packets, feel free to send me an email. I will also send you a packet and a feedback survey at the end of class, so you can have it then as well if you're just signing up just this moment. So you'll get the packet. But in here I have a little bit about the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet pyramid, which I always love to show because it's just so informative, so colorful. I mean, I love, this is a great thing to just have on your refrigerator at home. And what I love about it is it says a Mediterranean diet pyramid. You can see here, it's so much more than just a diet. It's an anti-inflammatory lifestyle that involves social connections and movement and mindfulness, connecting with your food and the land. So it's so much more than just what you eat. And as we learn more and more about our food, of course, the nutritional aspects are essential. And there's a lot of other stuff to that as well. If you notice, perhaps if you feel stressed or anxious, maybe your stomach starts to close down. Well, that can actually mess with your absorption of nutrients, right? So eating in a space that's calm and feels like a good, safe place to eat, that's really important. And even taking a few breaths, just deep breaths before you begin your meal, it's a very, very simple practice. It can really help your body to begin to rest and digest. So that's what we want whenever we're eating. We want to be able to digest our foods well. All right, so I'm going to jump right in because we have to make this spanakopita, which is maybe a little more on the complex side in terms of how my recipes usually are, because it uses phyllo dough, which is, I think it's the most beautiful, paper thin. You can see through it. It looks almost like parchment paper. I'll show you in a moment. And it just gives everything, there's this magic thing that happens when you add phyllo to anything. It just becomes crunchy and crispy and just delightfully everything. So this is the phyllo dough that we're using. You can buy this. I bought this over at Kohl's. I think it's called COLES, Kohl's Market, not too far from here in Montrose, I think. But you can usually find phyllo in a lot of places. I like this one because it doesn't have any trans fats in it. It says it's vegan right on the label, and the ingredients are, enriched flour, a little bit of oil, and that's pretty much it. So not a lot. There's a few other things in here: reduced iron, niacin. It's not the most pure product, but it is the most delightful. So we're going to be using phyllo dough, and we're not going to use, heaps and heaps of it. Just a few, maybe 12 to 16 sheets in total, which sounds like a lot, but when you see how thin they are, you'll notice that it's really hardly at all. All right, so let's begin. We're going to start by sauteing our ingredients and getting those ready. So I've got my saucepan here. I'm going to get this heated up. And if you'd like to share some of your favorite Greek foods, pop them into the chat. I'd love to hear from all of you. What do you like to make in your own homes that is Greek or Greek inspired even? If you've got some favorite dishes, you know, feel free to share them with us. I think one of the wonderful things about these classes is that we all learn from each other and we get inspired by each other and what we're making in our kitchens. So feel free to share. So these are the chives. I'm just gonna slice these up nice and thin. And Alita, as I'm working down these chives, what do we have coming through?
So the first question, Chef Emily, is what is the brand of the phyllo dough that you were showing?
The Philo Factory.
Very good. And then Gina shared that she likes tzatziki sauce. Tzatziki sauce.
So good. Yeah, tzatziki. Yeah, wonderful. That's a yogurt, usually a yogurt-based sauce. And it's a savory yogurt sauce that I love too, because you can put so many herbs in it. I mean, you can throw chives, mint, parsley, oregano, you know, basil, all those different, you know, beautiful bright herbs. You can really flavor it up with that. Anything else?
Avglo soup. I could never pronounce that, but it's delicious. I know the lemon.
The lemon and chicken one, I think. Sometimes there's orzo in there. Yeah, that's a really good. I think if I'm correct, that's really yummy. All right, we're gonna start by just briefly sauteing. We've got chives from the garden, but you could use scallions instead if you prefer to use scallions. I'm just using chives because that's what's growing. So we're using up what's coming from the garden, what's coming in. So we're gonna add our chives and just saute them briefly. Don't need a lot on these, right? We're gonna add some minced garlic. So this is about 3 cloves, and I'm gonna show you how I did that, just with the simple garlic clove, pressing down to remove the paper, or you use, you know, the bottom of something flat and you just give it a little smash, and oops, and then you can peel this papery skin off, trim the bottoms, and you're on your way, off to the races. So you can just start by getting a little mince here. And of course, you can use the jarred mince stuff if that's what you love and works for you in terms of ease. So there's our minced garlic. Of course, I love the purity of, you know, the real garlic straight from the clove. You know, it hasn't been sitting around too long. So nice and fresh is always my preference. But I acknowledge sometimes in a pinch, you know, we have to make do with what we have. We're gonna add lots and lots of herbs. So I have some chopped dill, and just be careful with dill because it grows in really sandy, it can grow in very sandy environments. This dill was very dirty. So when I came home, grocery store, what I did is had a nice big bunch of dill and I just chopped like maybe 3 inches where the stems were on the bottom. I love the stems, you know, I didn't really pick through everything. You can see like there's still a few stems in there, little stems, but they're in there. And I filled a bowl with water and I did my, you know, typical, my typical plunge, herb plunge. So, you know, putting the herbs in the water, in the cold water, shaking them up really, really well so all the dirt falls to the bottom, and then lifting them out and then putting them in a separate bowl to dry off a little bit. So then I chop them up and in they go. And you want to use a good amount of herbs for this recipe. I'm going to show you how to. This is our mint. So we're adding dill, mint, but you could add, you know, if you wanted to add basil, I wouldn't stop you. I mean, that sounds good too. So just picking the mint, I don't chop up the stems. I do pick them off the stems. So these have all been picked. And again, we're using what's coming from the garden. Such an exciting time of year. And same thing here, just start kind of roughly chopping these up. There's something really amazing when you chop mint, something that just happens. I don't know how to describe it. It's like the aromas of the mint just are really overwhelming, but in the loveliest way. So we are going to get that all chopped up. All right. And make sure whenever you're chopping your herbs, you do want to chop with a very sharp knife. I often emphasize this in my classes because you don't want to bruise your herbs. You want to make sure that it chops all the way through and it doesn't end up being kind of, you know, if you bruise it, then the liquid comes out. There can be some water. You lose out on flavor. So our next step is to add our spinach. So this is spinach that was fresh, and this was a bin of spinach, a bin of spinach, and it is almost like nothing now. So I threw it in some boiling water really quickly, just added it to the water, and then when it just, the leaves started to wilt, I drained it, I squeezed it, and this is what we have left. So you can also use, frozen spinach as well, just thaw it out. And feel free to use the frozen spinach if that's a little bit easier, because it's a lot of spinach. So I wouldn't say, you know, if you're planning to make this recipe, don't go to the store and buy huge amounts of spinach, because it's going to take up your entire refrigerator. So either make it, you know, right away that day when you buy your spinach, or, you know, you can make it from the frozen stuff, which works out really well also. So we've got lots and lots of herbs flavoring this. We have a little garlic. Some spanakopita will also have onions. So feel free, if you wanted to do onions, you would start with those before the garlic. But yeah, you just want lots and lots of herbs. Salt and pepper, essential. And I just want to kind of warm all that together, warm it through, mix all of our ingredients really, really well so they have a little bit of time to get to know each other in this pan. And this is it for our filling. We're almost done. We're going to make the, I'm going to turn that off while we make the cashew cheese. So for this involves soaking your cashews overnight. So these are raw cashews, not toasted, not salted, completely raw cashews. And they're very soft and juicy now because they've been sitting in cold water overnight in the refrigerator. If you wanted to make this recipe and you just thought, oh, darn, I forgot to soak my cashews, well, you still can make it. You can just grab some boiling water from the stove, pour it over your raw cashews, and wait about 20 minutes. That will work too. Some people don't like to use the boiling water when they're working with raw nuts because they feel like it kills, you know, any of the enzymes or anything, but we're baking these anyways. So, you know, if there was anything in the nuts to survive in terms of like delicate nutrients, you know, you're still going to get your macronutrients, your proteins, your fats, your fiber, all that's still going to be intact. So this is going in to our food processor. I'm going to draw this forward just a touch so you could see. And then we just have a couple other things, some more garlic, a little bit of maple syrup, just a dash. You could use honey if you wanted. And some salt. There's also salt in this little dish. I added it earlier. I see it here at the bottom. All right, we've got some fresh lemon juice going in. Oh, that's such a good smell, that bright citrus. And this is just going to pulse together to make our, you know, sort of crumbled cashew feta-esque cheese. All right. You can also use a couple of you know, flavor enhancers like miso is always great if you're trying to make a vegan cheese. Miso adds that kind of umami richness. You can also add nutritional yeast. That's another thing people really like to use. And I just kind of pulse these together. I don't want it to go too long because I don't want, you know, a full like puree, but I do want like this kind of texture. Okay, do we have any questions about that? I'm going to add this to our mixture and we're going to start layering our pie, spinach pie.
Annalise, for some reason I got disconnected and when I came back I only have one question. I don't know if there
was. Oh, that's okay.
It says, what
well,
is it?
Why don't you ask it, and then if we missed any, please type your question again.
Thank you. It says, what is the equivalent amount of fresh spinach versus frozen?
Ooh, all right, fresh spinach versus frozen. So I feel like I added that in the recipe, but maybe I didn't. 3 pounds of fresh spinach, cooked and squeezed to remove moisture, or 3 cups thawed frozen spinach, also squeezed to remove moisture. So 3 pounds is a lot of spinach, because as you imagine, spinach is not the heaviest of things on the menu. So it's a very, you know, dense amount of spinach when you kind of squeeze everything out.
There was
Anything else? Did we miss anything else?
There was a comment from Denise. She made fat pretzels with feta cheese, Kalamata olives, and kale. Her family thought it was spinach. She needed to moisture the same way. So that's how she's made it. And then a question from Thea. How much feta cheese would you use if you prefer feta and not cashew? She's allergic to nuts.
Sure. Yeah, oh, definitely. If you're allergic to nuts, go the traditional route. Use the feta. And if you can tolerate the lactose, you know, more power to you. So if you wanted to use regular feta instead, let me just have a look at our recipe here. Okay, so we have about 1 cup of cooked soaked cashews. You could use about a cup of feta cheese. That's probably pretty equivalent. You know, maybe a cup and a half, up to your liking. The only thing I will note is with the feta cheese, do be careful because it adds a lot of salt. So you may think, oh, I'm, adding just a little sprinkle of salt. You may not need to add salt if you've got feta in there. So just at this stage, what you could do is you could taste this filling and just see, is it balanced? Is it salty enough? Does it have, that little tang from the lemon? Does it have the herbs balanced in there? So you can kind of taste and adjust at this stage, right? And then see for yourself. Any other questions? And we're going to begin with our phyllo.
Not at this point, Chef.
Okay. So what I've done so far is I've layered 6 phyllo sheets on the bottom. So I did, or 7 or 8, I don't know. I kind of lost count, but 6 to 8 is the number. So I put olive oil first, and I cut the phyllo sheet. And I'm going to show you because I'm going to do the top. So I just didn't want to have to, repeat this for you guys. So I did the bottom with olive oil, phyllo, another olive oil layer, more phyllo, another olive oil layer. You guys get the idea, right? All the way to the top layer. So here we are at the top layer, and we can add our filling at this point. So you just want to make sure you really spread it out. And then we're going to do the top the same exact way. So a lot of spanakopitas are sold as like these cute little triangles. You can definitely do that if you want to. I don't bother because I find it's just so, time consuming, but it is a really fun thing to do. If you've got kids around or something like that who want to participate in cooking, it's really like, it's sort of like delicate, fun work with your hands. So kids really love that. So we've got our layers in there, and then you want to set yourself up for success here, right? So we have our phyllo and our olive oil in a bowl with a pastry brush. It is really useful to have a pastry brush if you're going to be making this dish. If you don't have one, you can use paper towel in a pinch, but the pastry brush, or even like a painter's brush, if you haven't used it for paint, I've done that, is fine. So the first thing is when you buy your phyllo, usually it's going to be in the freezer section. So what you're going to want to do is the night before you take it out of your freezer, put it into your refrigerator, right? So it has time to thaw out because it's such a delicate sheet. You don't want it to rip and tear and still be frozen in the middle. So you've taken it, you've put it in your refrigerator, and then about 2 or 3 hours before you're going to make your dish, take it out and put it on the counter. So it has some time to get to room temperature from the refrigerator and completely thaw out, especially the middle, which tends to, still be frozen sometimes. And then it tears very easily. So you want to make sure that you do those steps. Those steps are also listed usually on the back of the package somewhere. Yeah, here it says thawing instructions. Place in refrigerator for 7 or 8 hours or overnight. Allow unopened phyllo package to stand at room temperature for about 2 hours before using. So it comes in a little plastic sleeve, and then you'll take it out of this plastic sleeve and you'll unroll it, and it often will have, like out of the plastic sleeve, it will have a piece of paper wrapped around it, parchment paper usually, and a little piece of tape. So you just want to snip that tape gently because you don't want to tear things because it is a delicate dough. And then you're gonna open it up from that, first that exterior. This is the exterior kind of paper. It's not really paper, it's actually more like plastic. So you can see this was wrapped around the dough with the little piece of tape. So I just snipped that, unwrapped it, and then the whole thing unraveled. I placed it in a sheet pan. I covered it with parchment paper, and a little saran wrap, because you don't want your phyllo to dry out. So that's why I keep it covered as I'm working with it, and just sort of uncover to take what I need. So at this point, we can start to do the top. So I'm going to pull back the saran wrap, pull back the parchment. Don't get confused. Don't use the parchment paper instead of the phyllo. And then I see this one's kind of crumpled up, but I think we can salvage it. There we go. And put it here. There's I'm going to pull out, about, you can try to count them. Sometimes it's hard. This looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then maybe I have 2 more there. So just try to gently pull them apart. And this one's tearing a little bit, so that's okay. I'm just gonna set that one back, and just kind of gently disconnect. Okay, these guys really want to come too, so we're gonna take them all. We're gonna take them all except for the very bottom ones. All right, put that on top. And this is a little bit tricky, right? Because my pan is not the same size. Now let's cover the rest of these up. You can refreeze phyllo after you, if you're done working with it. So this I'm done working with. I can roll it back up again, and then put it in the freezer for another, 3 weeks. All right. So we've got our phyllo, and we have to cut it to size because it's not the right size for this pan. So I'm going to go across the top, and just sort of do an approximate guess. And let's do down the bottom too, right here. So I just want to make it a little bit more narrow so that it fits. It's good to have a very good pair of scissors, and make sure that you're really at the bottom because it does like to try to escape the scissors. See, right here. All right. All right, and this is where the fun part comes. So you've got your puff pastry at the bottom, you've got your filling, and then this is really like my favorite thing. You can just take one, put it over the top, get your olive oil ready, brush it, right? Make sure, you want to tuck it down a little bit, brush it really well. Okay, and then we'll do it again. So we do this 6 to 8 times. Now you see why I did the bottom layer, right? I didn't want to bore you all. So this is, again, the layer. You can kind of press it down. And you can be very generous with your olive oil. Now, a lot of spanakopita recipes use butter. This is where I'm a little different. I prefer the olive oil. I think it gets just as crispy. And it's, a lot more healthy for us. So that's number 2. Any questions while I'm doing this?
Yes, actually, there is a question from Barbara. She wants to know, is there a way to decrease the fat, maybe using less phyllo or oil, or, is there a substitute?
Yeah, so Barbara, that's a good question. So you can't really substitute the oil because it's what's going to make this crispy, but I'm actually really not using that much because I'm just brushing the layer. And phyllo itself is really not very fattening. It's a very, you can see it's not a dough that has, tons of butter in it. So this is not a particularly fat heavy dish. Of course, if you made it with butter and feta cheese and, in the more traditional way, it might be a little bit heavier. So I wouldn't change a thing about this, really, in terms of health, because I think it's pretty good.
And then there's a question from Sharon. She says, regarding the cashew cheese, what is the taste like? Is it just nutty flavored? And if so, how does the recipe maintain the spanakopita taste? She thinks she's missing something.
Yeah, so Sharon, if you're not convinced by the cashew cheese, by all means, go for the feta if you would like to. I think, my take on it is it does add a little bit of nuttiness. It adds the texture too, like that little textural element. And I don't know. I think when I think of spanakopita, I think spinach. I don't necessarily think feta. So you're really retaining a lot of the spanakopita flavor because you're honoring the integral ingredient, which is really the spinach. I hope that's a satisfactory explanation.
And Denise had a comment. She knew working with phyllo was difficult, so she truly appreciates you walking them through the entire process. She can't wait to try this.
It is a process, Denise, but it's okay. You know, it's a process that's totally doable. You can see here, like my phyllo is there's two sheets are kind of sticking together a little bit. So I just gently pull them apart. And guess what? If you mess one up, they're so thin and they're so, you know, delicate. Just you know, try your best. I'll show you how to work with one that's broken. This next one's broken. So this one stayed whole. Because you can really just kind of like scrunch it up and, you know, work with it anyway. So you can see this one's broken, has a slit down the middle, and it's even breaking at the top. And you can just kind of like, you know, nest it in there as best you can, you know, tap it down, move it around a little bit. Don't be intimidated by phyllo. It's a very gentle dough in all terms, in all senses of the word. All right, and then here at this point, you can go ahead and score it if you want. So what does that mean? You can take your knife, and this will help you later down the line. You can just start to cut, you know, a little bit through the top. I'm actually going to cut all the way through. It's a little bit easier to serve if it's been cut through. So you can go, you know, across. You can have them in squares. You can do them in triangles. Triangles is a very traditional, you know, you would just go across this way. It's a very traditional shape for these. So in they go, 20 minutes. Hope we have time. Any other questions about that?
Yes, Thea wants to know, can you use half the amount of the phyllo dough on top?
Half the amount on top. Yeah, you probably could. You could, I mean, you could certainly, it might not be as like grabbable, but as long as you've got the bottom layers in there, it should be okay with, you know, with 3 to 6 layers of phyllo on top. That's sort of a good, you know, that's good piggybacking off of Barbara's question. Could you make this a little bit lighter? Well, I guess you could use less phyllo sheets, and, you know, it's not going to be as flaky or as crunchy, but it is still going to be nice. Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks, everyone. Those are really good questions. All right, and then for our phyllo that we haven't used yet, I'm just going to show you what to do with that. Right, so here you are. You're so proud of yourself. You've got your spanakopitas in the oven. Everything's great. I hope I have the oven at the right temperature. I think I do. Yes, 375, perfect. All right, that's me thanking my past self. So here we have our parchment paper, and what I like to do is, you know, just make sure everything's in one smooth layer. And I actually like to roll it around the parchment paper. So I have the parchment paper on the top, and I have a piece of parchment paper on the bottom too, which if you wanted, you could, you know, do both and just roll it around the parchment paper. Very, very gentle. Nice little phyllo. Okay. And now we can get our saran wrap out and just wrap it really well, and then put it into our freezer for a later date, next time you feel like making something with phyllo. So these packages usually come with quite a few sheets. Also, spanakopita freezes as well. So if you wanted to, you know, it is a process. So, you know, if you're going to set up your kitchen and just go for it, you know, you can make a whole bunch and use the whole thing. All right. Further questions?
Yes. Does the filling need to be cooled?
Does the filling need to be cooled? You know, my filling was not super hot, but it doesn't need to be like cooled. Not really. It's going to go into the oven pretty quickly. All right. So let's get ready for our next recipe here. We have our fava bean puree. I'm just going to give our little food processor a rinse because it's getting a lot of action today. And you could also make this in a blender. No worries there. I don't mind if it's a little wet, right? It's just water. And if there's a little extra garlic and cashew flavor in there, could be interesting. So I'm not too, you know, unless I'm doing stuff with meat or fish or something like that, I'm not too particular about making sure everything is pristine for the next recipe, you know, for the next recipe if I'm working all together. All right, I'll put my blade in there. And we're gonna start off with our fava beans. So fava beans are wonderful to, this time of year. You can find them fresh in their in the pods. Still a little early, but in some places you can begin to find them. If not, you've always got the frozen ones. So here are our frozen fava beans. And what have I done so far? So I took them frozen. They look like this when they're frozen. And then I brought a pot of water to boil, just water, nothing in it. And I boiled it for just about 4 or 5 minutes, not very long. Then each fava bean has a little shell, and I kind of open it up a little and press the fava bean out from the outside. You don't want to eat this part because it's not really, I mean, I'm sure some people do, but I don't find it very yummy. It's kind of like, it's a little rubbery and it's a little like fibrous and not as flavorful. Yeah, it's kind of hard. So just, I use my nail to kind of get in somewhere, open it up a little and squeeze. And if it comes out as a mush, that's fine. We're making a mush, it's all good. So again, nail, squeeze. This one came out whole. And there you go. Questions? I think I saw one come through.
What beans can you substitute for the fava?
Anything. I mean, you can make a bean puree with black beans, chickpeas, we know as hummus, right? White bean, cannellini bean is really good. Kidney bean, I mean, you can really puree any bean and make a bean puree. It's really up to you. But I like the fava beans. For this recipe in particular, if I were to make a substitution, I would probably do the cannellini. That would be my substitution of choice. Or chickpea could work too. Only because I find like those flavor profiles are a little bit milder. Black bean, a kidney bean, a pinto bean, they have a little bit of a stronger taste. So I think the best choices would be for this recipe would be a little bit of a milder bean. So I've got my shallot here. I already put away my cutting board. Let's see if I get that back. All right. I don't really need it for much, but I don't like to use my knife on any other surface because it will dull the blade over time. So you just want to have a little spring in your board. And we're going to start by chopping up our shallot. You can also add the shallot to the food processor and let the food processor do the chopping for you. That's really nice, right? That's kind of why we invented these things. So pulse that, chop it up. And we're going to add the fava beans. So I have a little bit more than the recipe calls for in terms of quantity because I did the whole bag. I was feeling very ambitious today. And I peeled each one of these, right? So this is actually a really nice task, kind of, I don't know if there are any knitters in the crowd, right? But when you're working with your hands like that, and it's a little bit mindless, and it's just like a nice space for your head to be in and wander and, while your hands are a little busy. So we've got some thyme, fresh thyme, and I picked this off the stem. So again, taking those leaves, pulling them off the stem little by little. There's a few little stems in there that, the more flexible ones, that's okay. We've got some salt and pepper, some lemon juice and lemon zest. So wash your lemon first, dry it really, really well. Otherwise your zest is just gonna get stuck to everything. And zesting goes right in, and then we'll juice. Another question?
Yeah, do you think edamame can be substituted for the fava?
Ooh, that's a really interesting idea. Edamame doesn't get quite as creamy as fava beans, but you could probably mix edamame and cannellini beans. I really like the idea of the edamame because it adds a lot of protein, which is nice. You could probably mix like edamame and cannellini to kind of get an interesting bean blend going on. Yeah, but try with the straight edamame and then see, if it's not quite creamy enough, you could always add maybe, what else could make it creamy other than a different kind of bean? I guess olive oil or a splash of water, just kind of thin it down. I have to keep thinking about that one.
And do both these recipes last your usual 5 to 7 days?
Yeah, more or less. If I don't write that on a recipe, usually that's what it is. The standard is 5 to 7 days in the refrigerator, unless it's seafood or meat based. Then I usually say like 3 to 5. And then for freezer, both of these are veggie based, so you could freeze for 6 months without a problem. Over 6 months of freezing, because we all know it happens, you would have to, you know, it might have a little bit of a freezer bite to it, but it would still be edible. It'd still be food safe. All right, we've got our zest in there. It's smelling really fragrant. So we have our shallot, which we chopped up first, our quickly cooked fava beans, salt and pepper, thyme, lemon zest, lemon juice, really bright, you know, this is very characteristic of Greek cuisine, right? The simple lemon juice, olive oil, salt and pepper, right? These are the things that grow in Greece. So it's natural that that would be a big part of how things are seasoned. All right, we've got our olive oil here, and I'm going to show you a little trick if you want to get in on this. So we'll puree that together, and as it's spinning, I like to add the oil as it's spinning. It just helps to kind of emulsify the mixture a little bit, right? We can get a spatula and kind of encourage the beans down the edges there. And just add the remaining oil as it's flying. You can do this for any, you know, any recipe that you're blending in oil. It's a good trick because it kind of whips the oil and emulsifies it as it's being integrated. So you end up with something with a little bit of a lighter, fluffier texture. It's great to do that with hummus. It's also great to do that with salad dressings. If you're making a salad dressing in a blender, definitely you can do your oil that way too. Just opening the top gently, you know, if you want to keep it running. You don't want your salad dressing to go all over the kitchen, which happens, but there you go. You can see how nice and smooth this texture is. It's this beautiful, like light green. It's really so pretty, right? And you can see it's like really almost like a whipped bean spread. All right, any questions about that? It's a pretty easy one, right?
Yeah, comments. Elaine states, your comments about the phyllo dough along with using oil makes me feel much better about eating it. She says, thanks so much. I would definitely be making it because I love it, but would not have it because she thought it was not healthy.
Oh, I know. I'm with you, Elaine. I totally understand. And I absolutely love phyllo and anything with it. So it's usually just wheat flour, like very thinly rolled wheat flour, you know, but then often there's tons of butter added to it, which is a real shame because it doesn't really need the butter to get crispy. It just needs a little oil. And as we know, we use oil in a lot of our cooking. So why not this? All right, well, I've made this into a giant mountain, which is certainly not the most elegant. In culinary school, we're taught to kind of like put things in a, you know, shallowly in a plate or dish, just to like make it look nicer. But, you know, we've got a mountain of fava beans. So here we are on Fava Bean Mountain. All right. You can add some garnishes to that, a little lemon zest. You can do a little drizzle of oil on top, you know, garnish it however you'd like to have your fava bean spread. So this is really nice on a crostini. I like it with veggies. You know, I'll just dip my carrots into it or celery. You know, you can use crackers if that's what you've got. You don't need to go out and buy, you know, crusty bread and do all that, but you certainly could if you would like to. All right, let's gather up here. So we've got our spanakopita cooking. I'm very curious to open and check, but I don't want to release too much heat from in there. So I'm just going to let it keep going for about 5 more minutes, and then we'll check on it at the end of class. So in the remaining 5 minutes, do we have any questions? And then I also want to discuss a little bit about Greek cuisine, Mediterranean diet, as well as olive oil.
No questions, Chef Emily.
Okay, so other redeeming factors of spanakopita, if I haven't convinced you so far, is the mountain of spinach that's in there. So spinach, of course, very, very high in vitamins A, C, and K. It's high in iron, folic acid, calcium. It's also high in oxalates. So please be careful, people out there who are at risk of developing kidney stones. Please speak to your doctor about how much spinach is appropriate for you because it's a high oxalate food. And then the cashews are in there. So a quarter cup of cashews has about 150 calories. There's some interesting research being done around nuts and how many of those calories are actually absorbed. So there's a portion of the fat that they contain that remains trapped in the cashew's fibrous walls. So rather than being absorbed during digestion, there's a possibility that we don't actually absorb all of the fat and calories that are in nuts. Now, this is kind of new stuff being studied, so the jury's still out, but I think it might be an interesting thing to, look into and follow as we learn more about that. Fava beans are very rich in protein, folate, soluble fiber, tons of soluble fiber. They also contain iron and potassium, and they're actually rich in a compound that your body then converts to dopamine. So maybe that's why everybody, is happier in the Mediterranean, because they're enjoying these fava beans and they're increasing their dopamine with the sunshine and everything else. And these beans apparently help your body to, have something in them that converts to dopamine. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then we talked a little bit about the Mediterranean diet. General principles include lots and lots of plants, using oil instead of butter like we did today, using less salt and really focusing on herbs. And you guys remember how many herbs we put into that spinach pie, right? We had the dill, we had the mint, we had the chives. You could also throw in parsley, you could add basil, whatever kind of beautiful green herbs you have, add them to your greens. They're just going to add more nutrition. And herbs and spices, I think, are largely overlooked as being two nutritional powerhouses. We don't really consider them that way. We just kind of consider them as like frivolous flavor enhancers, but they're so powerful. They're these concentrated forms of nutrients, really, and they're so important to use, and we don't use them enough, certainly in our culture, I think. So herbs and spices, limitations on red meat. So not a lot of red meat. We sort of think of the lamb shawarma and things like that when we think of Greek cuisine, but that's more in the United States. If you go over, to that side of the world, it's not so meat centric. There's a lot of fish, a lot of seafood. Lean meats, are used, chicken, absolutely, but it's not heavy on the red meats, and often that's more for special occasions. And then I have a little lesson for you all on olive oil. Using the whiteboard today, trying something new. Not sure if you guys can read it. Try to get the glare off of it. Is that all right, Alita?
Yes.
Okay. So olive oil, amazing, food to enjoy, high in the monounsaturated fats. And you guys who have joined me before know that it's probably my favorite oil to cook with for flavor and nutritional standpoint. How is it made? So olives are fruit. So you have to think olive oil is like a fruit juice. And the best quality olive oils are often the first cold pressed, unfiltered, extra virgin olive oils. And those really, really good ones will actually say, or maybe even have a little date on them of when they were pressed. So the ideal world, we would have our olive trees in our backyard, and we would be making our olive oil and, having it in our foods and having it super fresh, right? We don't live in that ideal world. We live in a slightly different ideal world where we don't have olive trees, but we certainly have access to olive oil. So what are you looking for? First of all, it is a fruit juice, so you want it to be as fresh as possible. This is more for not for cooking with necessarily, for using in your salads. So you want it to be as fresh as possible. If you're cooking with it, it's okay for it to be, filtered. And in fact, it's a little bit better if it's filtered and it's more of a regular olive oil and not necessarily extra virgin, because those regular olive oils can go at a higher temperature because they've had all of these particles removed because they've been filtered, right? And so those particles don't burn, which means the oil can go up to a higher temperature. So usually the olives are about 6 to 8 months old, and then they're harvested. They're crushed first, they're harvested, and they're crushed with the pit, and sometimes some leaves get in there too. That's ground down really, really well, and then it's pressed for about 20 to 40 minutes. That process is called malaxation. I don't know if I said that correctly, but that's basically 20 to 40 minutes where the oil and the water can start to separate, right? Then it's squeezed. Again, it's processed in a centrifuge, so it's spun, and then often it's filtered. Sometimes it's unfiltered and just goes straight out. Any questions about our olive oil process? I'm going to scoot this back so I can just access the oven because our time is up.
No questions, Chef Emily. Just a
Okay.
comment from Terry, giving you thanks for a great class.
Oh, you're welcome, Terry. My pleasure. Oh my gosh, this looks so yummy. So I just want to show you all the spinach before we sign off. You could probably use another 5 minutes, but you can see it's golden, it's bubbling, it's sizzling. It's going to be so lovely, and it smells really good. So I'm going to pop this back in while I clean up, and then it'll be done just in time for supper. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Such a pleasure to have you all on this beautiful May evening. I really appreciate your attendance and participation in these programs. Always a pleasure to have you here. And thank you, Alita, for your wonderful moderating. As always, we'll see you hopefully again next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.